Hi, I'm Tim Olson. I'm a canon lawyer. I work for the Diocese of Fargo in North Dakota. And in light of the current pandemic, there's a lot of questions that are coming up. People are asking questions about canon law that have never had an interest in canon law before. And right now, the most common question that I'm getting is can my bishop restrict me from receiving communion on the tongue? And this is happening because uh, uh, bishops are once again starting to open up public masses, but they've put certain restrictions in place in order to reduce the risk of transmission of the virus. And so, to first answer that question, can the bishop restrict me from receiving on the tongue? Can he say, no, you can't receive on the tongue? And in ordinary circumstances, that question is without doubt no. The bishop cannot, in ordinary circumstances, prevent a person from receiving on the tongue as long as they're otherwise properly disposed to receive the Eucharist. The most clear place where this is found in the law is in a document called Redemptionis Sacramentum. And it reads, this is number 92 in that, each of the faithful always has the right to receive Holy Communion on the tongue at his choice. And so that's the general rule. And now that law is found in other places, but that's the clearest spot. They always have the right to receive Holy Communion on the tongue at his choice. And so, um, uh, so that's the general rule. That's the general right. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that in the church, rights aren't viewed in the same way as they are in popular culture. They're not absolute. Rights in the church are always ordered towards the common good. And we see this in Canon 223. In 223, it reads, in exercising their rights, the Christian faithful, both as individuals and gathered together in associations, must take into account the common good of the church, the rights of others, and their own duties towards others. So again, that's just pointing out that our rights are not our own, so to speak. Our rights are to serve the common good. And the canon goes a step further. It says, in the second paragraph, it says, in view of the common good, ecclesiastical authority can direct the exercise of rights which are proper to the Christian faithful. This means that ecclesiastical authority, in the case of a diocese, that's normally a diocesan bishop, has the authority to make sure that those rights are exercised in a way that actually serves the common good rather than harms it, for example. So where do we find ourselves now? We find ourselves in really extraordinary circumstances. And bishops are tasked with weighing a lot of competing things right now. So there's this really fundamental underlying right to access to the sacraments. Then there's a right to how we receive the sacraments. And then there's, of course, the risk of spreading the contagion, the danger of the virus, both in the short term and the long term. So, when we look at the short term, bishops are trying to find ways, okay, how can we open up the sacraments again in a way that they're more easily accessible? And so they're looking for ways to do that in the short term. But they also have to look at long-term repercussions. What happens in a small diocese? So my own diocese is a fairly small diocese. Imagine that there's an outbreak and we lose 10 priests to the coronavirus. Now we've actually reduced the ability of the people to receive the sacraments, not just for a short period, but for years and years. Loss of 10 priests would essentially cripple the diocese for years to come. There would be whole parts of the state probably that wouldn't be able to receive the Eucharist without driving 75, 100 miles. It wouldn't be surprising at all for that to occur. And so the bishop has to judge not only how do I keep people in the pews safe, but how do I keep my clergy safe so that in the future there's people to provide them with the sacraments. And so taking the advice of medical professionals, a lot of bishops have determined that at this time, reception of communion will be done in the hand alone. And again, in ordinary circumstances, that's completely beyond the authority of the bishop. But canon law is not just the words written down in this book. Canon law is an expression of the church's philosophy and theology. And so to really get a good understanding of what we mean when we are talking about the laws of the church, we have to go back to primary sources. And one of the primary sources for these things is Thomas Aquinas. And so Thomas Aquinas, in the first part of the second part, question 96 of the Summa Theologiae, says, now it often happens that the observance of some point of law conduces to the common good in the majority of instances, and yet, in some cases, is very hurtful. Since then, the lawgiver cannot have in view every single case, he shapes the law according to what happens most frequently, by directing his attention to the common good. Therefore, if a case arises wherein the observance of that law would be hurtful to the general welfare, it should not be observed. And then he gives an example. He says, let's imagine a city that's under siege. And the city normally has a law that says the gates are to be closed. But there's a retreating force of the city's defenders who are trying to get inside the walls, and the gate is closed and locked. And the law says the gate is to be closed and locked. And Aquinas says, clearly in this circumstance, it is necessary to break the law, to disregard the law in order to make sure that the common good is protected. So you would open the gate so that the defenders can get in, and then you close the gate again. Thomas Aquinas continues. Nevertheless, it must be noted that if the observance of the law, according to the letter, does not involve any urgent risk needing instant remedy, it is not competent for anyone in particular to expound what is useful and what is not useful. Rather, only those who are in authority can do so. So what he's doing here is saying that if there's someone in authority present to make that decision, it falls on them to make the decision. Do we open the gates or do we not open the gates? But he continues. If, however, the peril be so sudden as not to allow the delay involved by referring the matter to the authority, the mere necessity brings with it a dispensation, since necessity knows no law. So ordinarily, if a bishop wanted to restrict communion to in the hand only, the only way he could do that would be by appealing to the Holy See and saying to the Holy Father, I'd like permission to mandate reception on the hand alone in my diocese. I don't think there's any bishops that would do that, and I'm confident that the Holy See would not do that in ordinary circumstances. But because of the urgency and the difficulty of getting a quick response when the Holy See itself is dealing with the effects of the coronavirus, it is certainly appropriate and legitimate for the bishop to act on his own authority in that situation. So again, what he says is, if the peril does not allow of delay involved by referring the matter to the higher authority, the mere necessity brings with it a dispensation, since necessity knows no law. And so the bishop is certainly in this circumstance acting in his rightful authority because of this necessity that he perceives in order to protect his people and his clergy while providing them with the sacraments. Now, what happens after the coronavirus? The necessity ceases, and so does the bishop's ability to restrict a person's access to the sacraments according to the normal rites that we have. So it's only in this case of necessity that these changes are present. So can the bishop do what he did in these circumstances? Yes, the bishop can restrict how we're utilizing our rites, but it's only in cases of necessity. He can't do it forever.